Simeon, I'm going to start with you. And I'm going to ask you a very simple question. What is spam?
I'm not going to answer that. And I'll give you a reason why I'm not going to answer that. We've used this word, well, probably about once every 5-10 minutes today. And what actually is spam? It's a really good question. We get asked it all the time. The reason I'm not going to answer it is it's like case law. If you define it, it becomes something absolute specific that people will then hold against you. That's the rules. I'm not doing that, therefore it must be good. Great example, about 10 years ago, the Indian regulator came out with a definition of what's spam. 100 messages a day. Guess what spammers did? Yep, 99 messages a day. It's not spam, see, it's written here. So yeah, I mean, the guidelines say bulk and unsolicited, but yeah, what about one single phishing message? It's just as bad. So, I mean, Alison made reference to it earlier. You know, it's a continual developing case law. You know, I know it when I see it. I enrich, I continually evolve my definition of what is bad, what is harmful.
What's the difference between spam and unwanted messaging? Let's go there.
It's another really good question. You know, sometimes it's in the eye of the recipient. You know, I might have forgotten I've given consent. I might have forgotten who the brand is. I might not have realized that they're going to send me 10 messages a day. Does that make it spam? And it might make it spam for me or unsolicited, but is it bad for everyone? And I think that's the problem for the industry, is that when we're making decisions, it can potentially apply to everyone here. So it's about trying to get the right type of controls. And, you know, we heard earlier about things like stop and opt out. I think, you know, we need to now look at more granularity in that type of approach, not just a simple, let's block everything in a network.
So I don't agree at all. Well, actually, we said we were going to create some controversy right
Please
before we
do,
walked
please
on.
do.
So,
Yes.
No, of course, trying to define it and set rules around it is what we spend most of our time doing, and you can never do a good job of that, really, right? But as an industry, we really want our channel to be something that the end consumers value and that they're not getting things that they don't want to get, right? And how do you define what that is? Well, I'll agree with you there that you can't define everything perfectly. But we have a very big mission in our industry to be able to make our channel the best place that people will go to get information they care about, and that businesses are part of that.
I think it also depends on who you ask, right? I think different people in different roles in the industry are going to answer that question differently. If you ask an attorney, they're going to give you a legal definition, probably a regulator too. If you ask a consumer, they're going to say any messaging I don't like, I don't want it, it's spam. I think there are varying legal definitions in different jurisdictions. And then you talk to a carrier, they're probably going to talk about consent and disallowed content. And I think they're all sort of different sides of the same coin. That's probably too many sides for a coin, but I think it really does depend on who you're talking to and their interpretation of spam and what they consider spam. And that is an area where we don't all agree in the industry. And I think if you were to ask everybody in this room, we would get half a dozen different answers.
But we wouldn't write any of them down. Brien.
Oh no, I agree with my colleagues. I mean, spam is it's in the eye of the beholder. I mean, you know, as he had said, you know, it's it when you see it. And spam here in the United States is one thing, or in Canada is one thing, in the United States it's another, in the Indian countries it's another. So it's all very localized, it's all very personalized to the individual itself. We're also starting to get a lot of what's called false positives, where the individuals themselves are getting messages for which they did want, they did sign up for, they did give consent for, but they're also now considering it to be spam. And that's with the 7726 and the 7727 reporting. And that's where we, as leaders in the industry, we have to take a step back and we have to look at it and we have to say, okay, is it truly spam? Or is it just that I, as a consumer, I have zero inbox syndrome? And that is where I don't want to see that little red dot over my text messaging. I just want it all to be cleared out. It's not truly spam. It's more just, I don't want to see it. And it was easier for me to swipe left and say it's spam.
Yeah, I'm kind of with everybody. The biggest thing is, right, at the end of the day, if you ask me what it was, I'd say ask a subscriber. It's really any unwanted, unexpected message, and spam has become universal. It's like Kleenex, it's like Xerox, you know, it's kind of been a catch-all. I don't want the message, I didn't expect the message, it's spam. Coincidentally enough, after you and I spoke last week, I participate in this like online forum for a hobby that I like, and it's a particular manufacturer that sends out surveys. It said when you answer them, you can see what everybody's responses are, and it was about if we sent you SMS messages about the following. There was probably 50 some odd replies to it. There was like 5 people, absolutely don't send me messages. I like spam, I like spam on my email. Other ones were like, I want to hear all about the latest, the greatest. So it's like, it's a moving target, you know, but I always default back to is I think we have to put as much control back into the subscribers' hands because they're the ones complaining. You know, we can call it anything we want, you know, but if they're annoyed, they're calling their carrier.
I do think it matters what the carrier calls spam, though, especially for Adaptive and Proofpoint, who are being employed to do blocking. And I think there's a lot of liability they hold if they block something the carrier doesn't want blocked, and there's not clarity between their organizations. I think it impacts us as well, maybe to a lesser extent at WMC.
That's why I said let the subscriber choose.
Yeah,
The subscriber doesn't know. If you look at the complaint data, right, there's clearly stuff in there that's P2P messaging. There's clearly stuff in there that is legitimate or is carrier messaging, and they just didn't like hearing that they had a bill. Does that mean that they should stop sending that messaging? Well, that's a marketing decision at that point, but I think it doesn't necessarily make it spam.
Ian, you made the point that depending on where you are in the ecosystem, you're going to probably have a definition, and I agree that that's probably okay. I mean, if you're a carrier, you bear the burden of building these expensive networks and dealing with customer care calls and all that. But if you're an end subscriber, you have your own definition of what you want to receive. And you know, in the end, we're all here. We all have jobs. We're all employed because we're providing a service to these end consumers that pay for the cell phone service. So you know, we have to create a safe service for them. Their opinion matters. We get that they may report that Home Depot message that they forgot they signed up for. I get it, but that's their perception. If they feel that the entire ecosystem is untrusted, whether that's a false perception because they're receiving things they forgot they signed up for, or they're truly receiving things they didn't want, it still affects the viability of the whole ecosystem, the whole reason we're all here to keep this ecosystem alive.
And that's a great point, because what I want to do is a little bit of a level setting of terms. And I'm going to start with looking at you, Brien, and maybe explain, it's come up multiple times during the day, explain what is campaign drift.
Yeah, so campaign drift is exactly that. So Ian's a big car guy. It's like when you're going straight in a straight line, and then all of a sudden you're just drifting off to the left or off to the right. That's exactly what's happening with the campaigns themselves. I'm sending out communication specifically about, say, my gym membership, and then all of a sudden I'm starting to spike, and you're getting information about weight loss centers, or you're getting information about supplements, you're getting all of this kind of information that you never really intended to get. It's a drift away from the originating message. We're seeing this in an exponential rate in 10 digital encode channel, wherein the bad actors are coming in, they're signing up for, you know, very, very innocuous type of messaging, and then the message is starting to drift. It's slowly going away, and then the volume gets into a hockey stick. It just skyrockets. And you can see when you look downstream of when they've signed up where exactly that message is taking a left turn or has drifted.
That's a great summary. Thank you for that. That I will bring up to the firewall vendors on this panel. How are you working to get ahead of that problem, where the stated intent was really nice, and then they veered off course? Thoughts on that and how you're dealing with that challenge?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a couple of different angles to start with. I mean, the first off is campaign registration at least gives us a baseline of what the campaign was supposed to be. I mean, before we had that, we had nothing. I mean, there was no identity. They could have been doing anything. So at least we have a starting point of, okay, what were they supposed to be doing? The other area, you know, again, to put this all in context, we've got to make these decisions typically within 2 milliseconds. I mean, you know, it's great talking about it, but I'm sorry, when you're dealing with Yeah, tens of thousands of these every single second, and you've got to make a fast decision. So this is where things, and I know we heard about sort of large language models and ChatGPT earlier, this is where they come to play, because now we can start to get an idea not just of the lexical similarity, but the semantic similarity of campaigns. We can start to say, well, okay, there may be a lot of different words, but actually they're trying to do the same thing. And I think that's really, when we talk about drift, it's the drift of intent, not the drift of content.
The registration information is fantastic. I mean, that is, and we're probably still scratching the surface of what we can do with it. But when they register, they send sample messages, intent. There's probably not enough currently being done to track that drift. But the data is there, the technology is there to do it, and we can track changes in behavior, changes in patterns, and including changes from the original registration data. All the technology is there to do that.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things that we need to do is we all need to start incorporating AI into that analysis of sentiment and intent, right? So previously on social media networks, you can look at a message and you can determine its sentiment and its intent. You can determine if it's spam, if it's aggressive, or it's a neutral message, and we need to start doing that across the board while we're examining that. And I put that challenge out to everybody in the room because as Allison mentioned, there's eons of experience in this room, and we are the leaders of the ecosystem itself. And so we have to start taking that responsibility and really looking at it and saying, okay, what can we do better? And utilizing AI technology, looking at sentiment, looking at intent, looking at proximity of words, things of that nature are really going to allow us to try and track down some of these bad actors. And jumping is one of the things that we're all seeing a lot of. It's where they're on Syniverse, then they jump over to Infobip, then they jump over to Sinch, then they jump over to Twilio, and we have to make sure that we don't allow them to do that as well.
I think it's also important to define, what is the threshold when you're using AI and you're doing analysis of this content. Yeah. At what point does it tip the scale to the point where it's a problem and now it's a blocking issue as opposed to a monitoring issue? Yeah. I think we talk about this a lot when we're talking about SMS firewalls in general, is when do we have enough information, enough signals to say, yes, we can now block this message, because blocking of a message itself is not that difficult. It's having the confidence we should be blocking it versus the risk that we might block something that's truly important to get through, and we have that false positive.
I mean, I think actually that's quite a key point with the industry. It's wrong to think firewalls are just there to block. We're not. We want communication, good communication to get through to end users. So when we find things that don't look good, and it might be a little bit bad, or it might be bad for a number of reasons, but by alerting, you can sometimes get the sender to change their behavior. It's not about saying they were being deliberately malicious, but maybe they just didn't fully appreciate. I mean, we heard some examples earlier about sort of the way that some campaigns can be misrepresented. Identities not fixed, things like that, shared shortcodes, all these different techniques. And sometimes just by flagging to people, hey, if you just changed your sending behavior or the sending content in this way, end users would understand what you're trying to do. They would appreciate it. They would probably trust your communication that much more. So yeah, absolutely, sending signals, not just blocking, is a really, really key weapon in this whole approach to improving quality.
Yeah, I do want to have a question for Mike, because you mentioned in our prep call, you made a distinction between AI and ML. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's buzzword bingo in the industry. Pick your definition of AI and ML. A couple weeks ago, I asked ChatGPT, how can we stop spam and phishing forever? And it still hasn't come up with an answer. It's working on it. Actually, the answer is 42, if anyone knows that. So a little reality check for how spam systems really work for people who don't know. Most people think of it as, it's a bunch of if-then-else rules and programmed into a system, maybe by humans or whatever. That's like 25 years ago. Like, the reality is we're all using ML technology today. This is a big data problem. It's actually a great application of a big data problem. We're pulling in massive amounts of data, processing billions of messages a day. We have 7726 data, 7727 data. We talked about the power of all that data feeding learning systems. And ML is just a great application of that technology. We can derive so many insights from that and detect changes and different patterns. AI tends to be a bit of an abused word. Everyone's got their favorite definition of what it means. But trying to simulate human cognitive intelligence, that's a growing field, and that can help bubble things up that maybe a traditional machine learning system couldn't do. Machine learning systems are programmed to kind of look for anomalies and patterns, but there might be something different, right? That where an AI cognitive system can bubble something up that would recommend a change in a campaign or a change in intent for a certain type of campaign. These technologies are being applied today. The compute power, the data power just continues to grow. So we're going to be able to pull in more and more data and just make more intelligent decisions, using that type of technology.
And I would say it's because of the fact that the firewall vendors have been ahead of this technology, like the AI and ML, not to overuse the word, is the fact that I would say spam filtering is one tool of fighting spam that works extremely well. Not everyone's happy. Sometimes it becomes too blunt and we block traffic that we're not meant to. But if you were to say a spectrum 99.9% of the time, we get it right. And the one example of that is the fact that now more and more CPaaS vendors are using firewall vendors. You want to talk about that trend a little bit, and then I will talk to my friend in the CPaaS world on the operational burden of supporting something like that.
Yeah, I mean, well, certainly to start off, I think one of the big advantages is when you put any measurement point in, it starts to identify where the problem's coming from. So, with the carrier starting, you get to see the originating source. It feels like that's driven it upstream to the CPaaS. We're now seeing marketing aggregators, the folks behind that, starting to implement for the very same reason. When you find where the problem is coming from, you ask them to do something about it. And I think, that type of identification is improving things. It's giving a responsibility and an ownership to the problem there.
Yeah, some of the fraud techniques applied upstream as high as possible with CPaaS operators, very beneficial compared to applying it at the operators, because you just have so much more information available. They know who would register, they know the credit card, they know where they're registering, what API they're using, what IP address they're coming from, information that doesn't make it all the way down. And we see differences with CPaaS that have direct clients where they know a huge amount of information versus ones that are maybe carrying wholesale traffic where they don't really know the originator at all. They're just carrying it through a wholesale rate. Huge difference in what we're able to apply to that based on the amount of information we have available.
Yeah. But just to add, the closer you get to that originating point, the better we can be. So as you say, somebody's doing something bad. It might not be that actually they're doing something bad. It might be an account hijack. The only way you know is if you're close to that source. Likewise, what is spam? Again, could be well-intentioned, but maybe misimplemented. The only way to do it is to have a conversation. So it requires, the person who's got the relationship, the CPaaS, to have that type of discussion. And I'm sure, yourself and Brien, a lot of your time is spent account management, talking to the customers about improving.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot better idea where spam is likely to come from, right? If we're working with a major brand, a bank or whatever, sending bad messaging hurts their brand, and so they're not going to do that, right? Unless it gets hijacked, like you said. But then we also have CSPs down the road that don't have all of these controls in place. So we actually are working to identify a risk assessment for each of the clients that we have on different factors so that we know where to put our energy on, right? We only have so many people we can work these problems with. And if we look at the right places and do a good job of that, we can get to it a lot faster.
And WMC has been doing a lot of work in terms of machine learning and kind of message filtering yourself. Something you can share, because I know we've had a lot of fun chats about the kind of sophisticated attacks you see.
So we don't do any message filtering, but we do support the filtering vendors through partnerships, either directly or through common customers, where we're a signal that goes into them and they feed signals out to us. And I think if you look at some of the threats that are evolving that we're concerned about, especially in this era of easily accessible AI and chatbots and things of that nature, is the more conversational messaging that we see. So take an example that's common these days, originated in the UK and has since spread to Australia and has shown up here in Canada and the US, is the hi mum scam, or hi mom scam for those North Americans, which is, hi mom, I've smashed my phone and I'm texting you from TJ's phone. I need you to send me some money so I can go to the phone shop and replace it. And you think, well, that doesn't sound like that would work, but it does. And because it's conversational, it's harder to pick up on an automated basis early in the process. Now, right now, we know through investigating this that these are individual people with SIM-enabled devices that are sending the messages. It looks like it's a relatively small group of folks out of a couple of different countries who don't have very good VPN hygiene. But imagine if that really simple, maybe 4 or 5 message back and forth can now be automated through AI, through a chatbot, and it can be strapped onto an API key of a developer-friendly platform and can be simultaneously communicating with 1,000 victims. That's kind of what keeps me up at night. And we're seeing some other really interesting conversational threats. I think a big challenge that MNOs have these days around SIM swap is what I would call sort of blue-collar insider threats, meaning store employees. And we have seen instances where SMS campaigns have gone out saying, hey, if you're still working at insert carrier name here and you'd like to make some extra money, click this link or just respond to this text. And what this is threat actors recruiting salespeople or store managers to perform SIM swaps for larger amounts of money that they're paid in their day job. And unfortunately, it does appear to be working. And so being able to identify these more conversational scams, maybe these lower volume scams that are much higher impact in terms of the damage they do, is an area that we're concerned about. And we do think about, this concept's been out there in other areas. Do you have to invest in AI to combat the AI? And now you're, have 2 AIs talking to each other, trying to socially engineer each other to figure out who's behind the scam. And this goes back to some of the points earlier, where then you can involve law enforcement because you've gotten information about who's behind it. And I think to some extent that's where some of this is going to go with some of that. But I'd also like to see what the folks at the firewall vendors think about, well, how do we get better at detecting some of that conversational stuff? Because it is growing, and it's growing because it works. And I think what folks in this room need to understand is that we have this big collaboration meeting with 100 and some people in it. The threat actors do too. It's not in a ballroom in a hotel, but it's in a chat room or a bulletin board on the internet, and it's happening all day, every day. And these folks keep up with the solutions that are being developed in these rooms, and they are teaching each other how to get around them. They're teaching the best time of data spam and the best ways to get through Adaptive versus Proofpoint and the best ways to hit one carrier versus another. And so we have to be actively working against that. And I think AI does have a role to play in that.
That's actually a great way to summarize it. And the hi mom example is a perfect example of how tough a firewall is. You can't just block on saying, if message contains mom, block. I mean, seriously, what about Mother's Day, right? So you can't. It's more complicated than just doing an if then else clause. I do want to open up the panel for questions. So Mike, if you want to just summarize your take home call to action for this group, what would it be? And then we can take some questions.
This stuff is complicated. These threat actors are pretty good. If you don't go into this thinking that everyone's kind of looking for the silver bullet, if I can just buy that filter and put that rule in place, or get the regulators to put this law in place, these problems would go away. Let's be real. This is a tough race. If you don't go into it with the mindset that it's a continuous race, you're never going to keep up.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions from the audience?
Yeah, Tony from Infobip. It seems to me that we have a lot in common with also some of the OTT players like Facebook and Instagram and some of the other. As an industry, are we working with some of them to kind of solve these problems? I say this because last night I got a spam from someone that's a friend on Facebook, and it turns out it was a fake account. and they were trying to get me to do a loan or something silly. So it seems that the problem is pervasive across all platforms. And is there any value in maybe reaching out to that side of the fence, the non-carrier OTT companies, and see if there's any learnings we can get from both sides?
Yeah, 100%. I think there is, and I think it was Paul that made a comment also about sort of the lack of brand representation in this room. I think that's also a challenge, right? Is we should be hearing from the brands who are being negatively impacted specifically by smishing activity that's resulting in financial losses for their customers. And we should be looking at how we can better collaborate with those brands. And I'm not just talking banks. I mean, there's a wide variety of impacted groups, but I know there are some security groups and security working groups that do involve, Meta and Google and Microsoft and others. I can't say that they've necessarily been 100% effective, but I think bringing more people into the dialogue can only help. Worst case scenario, it doesn't move the needle. But I don't see the harm in trying to engage in a dialogue and bring some of those folks closer in.
There might be some insights that occur on one side of the fence.
Yeah.
100%.
Well, you should engage the enterprise too, right? That's at the end of the day, right? Who you're talking to brands and what Brien talked about with Drift. I mean, I sold on that side. They don't know they're breaking rules or they're pushing, they just said, I was approved. It sounds kind of like the other one. They really don't know it. And then on the other hand, besides selling new customers, I also shut them off. As a salesperson, I had to call people up, say, you didn't get away with it anymore. So there's a big, huge education thing. Forums like this, I think, would be great, not only for what Tony brought up, but also the enterprise, the brands themselves. They really, in my opinion, they probably have the most at risk here. Going back to the value and the worth of their brand. I mean, one bad thing can happen. I think we can think of a few things that happen in the news right now. Your brand could be trashed. So I think it's really get their input besides, like to Tony's point, the OTTs and stuff, and really say, what do you feel about this? What could we do to help you? And they might have a kind of different perspective of what they want to see.
Yep. Any other questions? Going once? Paul?
So just kind of a call out more than anything else, but when your definition or non-definition of spam you were talking about earlier, do you consider disallowed content in that definition? So we have blocking phishing obviously as a huge objective, but carriers have disallowed content policies, and we use these tools to identify that traffic and make sure that traffic doesn't traverse carrier networks as well. So how do you, do you include that in the definition? Do you include unconsented traffic? So as an example, I think I heard earlier, kind of on the line of if the consumer wants the message, is it spam? And I know a lot of consumers that probably want cannabis messaging. They probably want alcohol-related messaging. But right now, that just can't traverse carrier networks. So how do we address that?
Yeah. So the short answer is no, we don't consider disallowed for spam for exactly the reasons you say. Normally the folks defining disallowed tend to be...
If I could, just for 1 second. You have to define spam, first off. Then you have to define disallowed content. And then you have to define if you are going to allow disallowed content, which is just context of phrases or words, and then is it going to be spam? Because what he's talking about is we're sitting in Canada where you are technically allowed to send out communication for marijuana. It is carrier by carrier. In the United States, you're not allowed. So it is technically disallowed content and considered to be spam.
Sorry, my point though was actually,
Yeah.
I think they are distinct. They're both used by firewalls to control. And yes, I think the difference is with disallowed content, you can tightly define it. It's almost the nature of the category. So for example, in Canada, I think you can't advertise about marijuana pricing, but you can do other types of marijuana content. Or, well, I'm not a lawyer, so but there's certain rules that you can say, okay, definitively it falls into that content. Whereas spam, it could just be one single thing that nobody's ever seen before or defined, but only when you look at it can you then make that determination. I think that's a distinction. Disallowed content can be defined, and it is a principle that really every sender can say, right, okay, I sign up, that relates to my business, whether it be sort of alcohol, firearms, tobacco, pornography, gambling, things like that.
There's quite a bit of discussion among the carriers around personalization, and I think it's a great area to explore. We talked about, in the end, the subscriber owns that phone. It's a very personal device. And if we could allow some level of personalization through switches they control in their messaging app or however it's enabled, that gives them that level of personalization to allow what they want and disallow what they don't want. Anyone use Gmail? You have all those tabs. That was Gmail's answer to this problem of some people want those things, some people don't. Well, you can put them in tabs now. Yeah. You can decide.
You're setting me up for my next panel, which would be the RCS OTT one, because I think the SMS inbox is overdue for an upgrade on that one. But we are all about out of time. All the panelists will be available for talking, and you all know them. Thank you very much, panel. It's been very exciting to have you guys on stage. Thanks so much.